Hi, so for journal number 3, I'm going to be focusing on the question, look at Begbie's return to the four assumptions from earlier. How does he respond to these assumptions? What assumptions does he want you to focus on and why? So this journal might be a little longer than the others just because I'm going to be looking at the four assumptions again and then kind of relating them to what I found on page 148 to 152. What I think is him responding to these assumptions. Okay, so starting off, the first assumption, our transcendence is defined by our limits as humans, and we are only human, and therefore we can only experience what is within our limits. And so on page 148, he talks about how making art will have nothing to do with trying to disengage from our creatureliness, and how the artist belongs to the community of creation. He or she is finite and limited, but we are dwelling in a world no less finite and limited. The second assumption then is talks about our experience with transcendence and how it is not restricted to time or space. Divine transcendence is connected with God, regardless of whether it occurred in biblical times or in the modern day. Um, And then in on page 148 to 149, Begbie talks about how, um, nonetheless, it will be seen as part of a human calling that is unique. Um, so we, in humans, in the non-human world, finds a conscious answering voice, immortal from the dust of the earth, who can know and respond to God's love as a creature and love God in return. So as people, we are not simply recognizing the cosmic symphony, as he puts it, but we're also enabling it, articulating it, and extending it in a multitude of ways. And then the third assumption, which I think he focuses most on, um, uh, the third assumption is humans will try to relate to God and understand his transcendence, and regardless of their individual abilities, they can continue to grow in their understanding. It is a dynamic relationship. And so he expands on this on page 149 to page 150, to the end of page 150. And he says, the artist will be seen as reflecting the character of God's action in the world, albeit in her own creaturely way. Again, bringing up this creatureliness. So most importantly, um, in short, it means embodying and echoing as creatures alongside other creatures the action and presence of God to the world. And then he goes on to talk about in Genesis the affirmation that we're made in the image of God, and how humans are earthbound creatures, but we also speak of human uniqueness and invoking particular relations to God, other humans, and the created world at large. Um, and he talks about the obligations that go with these relations. Um, and another with continuing on this point of on this third assumption. Um, so humans reflect and embody the presence and action of God through responsible care of other creatures and cultural development of the earth. Again, talking about this dynamic between God and humans, and the divine and the non-divine. Talking about this present and action of God through care and such, it can include artistic making, though of course it involves very much more. Um, and most important in this context is clarity about the character of God humans are called to image. Um, and um, I'll just go into the last assumption then, which talks about the universal transcendence still allows for an understanding of the Trinity. And in on page 151 to 152, he talks about uh, when it comes to linking human and divine creativity, the key notion I would suggest is participation. And he talks about uh, God's drawing all things toward their end, and this does not exclude human action. It is called for, solicited, inspired, and enabled by the Holy Spirit. Talking about the Trinity, talking about the Holy Spirit. Um, it is by God's free and gracious will that we humans as creatures can be involved in the divine purposes. And then to be created then is to share by the Spirit in the new creation. Just again, relating the Spirit, the Trinity, to this idea of transcendence and this idea of, just transcendence. So I want to say that I think he focuses most on the third assumption. He talks about it the most, and I think it's one that he stresses the most because he then has a paragraph talking about in some, and in it he says that so basically the artist reflects God and transcendence in their own way, talking again about this like creatureliness. And in some paragraph, he says creaturely participation in God's yearning to bring the created order to a fullness of praise. Um, and again, going back to the third assumption, he, like I said, he talks about it the most, and it's basically just talking about how humans are related to God and can experience transcendence, um, and we try to understand it through God and through art or through the Bible. And regardless of our individual abilities, um, we continue to grow in our understanding of it. Um, yep. And just quickly again, through art, we embody this um, presence of God in the world and as creatures and alongside other creatures that God